Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today, I'm joined by Marya Shakil, who is the political editor and anchor with CNN News 18. Thank you so much, Marya, for joining us. And we'll be discussing today a number of issues related to freedom in the context of the Islamic faith. So let's begin with the first issue, which is indeed a very primary issue. And it deals with the freedom of religion that Islam allows. Should a person be free to choose Islam as his or her religion, or should a person be coerced into following Islam? So I would like to know, Marya, your thoughts on this and the experiences that you've had growing up in the Muslim community.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and shukriya, Marya. We have the same name, and there's lots that is in common between both of us. So shukriya for inviting me in this discussion that you hold every week, I believe, and I have watched it. It's with a lot of information. It has a lot of in-depth knowledge that you share. So shukriya everyone again, and assalamu alaikum. Let me begin with my understanding. We are born into a religion. Usually, people at very later stage in life, when they feel that they can adopt a different religion, they opt for it. But individually and a world at large is born into the family. And that family, the family which, the religion that family practices and professes is the religion by our birth. As someone who is from this community, from a Muslim community, I have been born into Islam. But over the period of several years and my upbringing, I have tried to understand Islam. And Islam is not about coercion. Islam is not about forcing others to adopt it. It's about trying to convince others. It's about telling what Islam is about. I'm going to quote words from Surah Baqarah, Marya, just for the benefit of your listeners and viewers. Let there be no compulsion in religion, is what Surah Baqarah says. Truth stands out clear from error. Whoever rejects evil and believes in God hath grasped the most trustworthy handhold that never breaks, and God knoweth all things. So basically, Islam is about trying to understand the religion and then making it part of our lives. So during the course of my life, I realized that every juncture, your relationship with Islam is about trying to tell others about what Hadith and Quran is, but not telling them that this is the best path. Again, at a time when there is a particular understanding of Islam or Sharia that is being professed and practiced in our neighborhood in Afghanistan, we are trying to put the lens on this, Marya, and I must compliment you for this, because it's important for us to understand that Islam doesn't force others. It just believes, it's about belief. And every belief is very individualistic. It's about a relationship that you have with Allah. मेरे और अल्लाह के बीच में जो रिश्ता है, वो बहुत ही इंडिविजुअल होता है, बहुत ही खास होता है. जैसे मेरे और मेरे वालिद साहब का रिश्ता था, वो बहुत ही खास था. मुझे बताया गया था कि अल्लाह आपके रग-गुलू से भी करीब है. I mean, this is the vein through which, the blood goes. That is the relationship that you build. And if that relationship is so personal, then how can it be forced? Marya, let me take this conversation forward with you. I'm looking at this, aspect, which I was discussing with Sadia as well, your sister, and help us understand if there is dissent, there are disagreements. Within the family also, it happens. What is at one point you realize that dissent or disagreement is not part of Quran? Can we say that अगर आपका कोई किसी चीज पे यकीन है, आप उसको क्वेश्चन नहीं कर सकते? ये सही है क्या?
Yeah, so thank you so much for your inputs on the first question that I raised about freedom of religion. And I would like to speak a little bit about that before moving on to the question of dissent that you've asked. And I think the initial verse that you quoted from the Quran, that verse was extremely important because it very unequivocally, you have the Quran, which is the authentic source of Islam, proclaiming or declaring that there is no compulsion, there is no coercion in religion, or let there be no forceful following of Islam. So this, I think, is so important. And I have, always pondered over why the Quran has stated, as you were saying, that religion is something which is not to be forced upon someone. And if you read the Quran, as we engage with our scripture, it's so important that we young Muslims read the Quran for ourselves, than simply just look at what is happening around and start believing in it, or simply take things from what we hear from the prevalent narrative. So if we engage with the Quran, as I started reading the Quran, and as I interacted with my grandfather, who was an Islamic scholar, I realized that a very prominent theme in the Quran is, you also know, you were talking about it, is your relationship with God, is your realization of God, your discovery of God. And you would know that, and you may have heard that it is called Iman bil Ghaib. And the reason why it is called Iman bil Ghaib, or belief in the unseen, is because God Almighty is not visible to us. He's not right before our eyes. Yet we are required to believe in him. And the process that the Quran prescribes for this belief, interestingly, is, as you were saying, you utilizing your intelligence. The Quran repeatedly enjoins the reader. It will tell you, use your intelligence, use your akal, use your reason, your faculty of thinking to discover this God. And once you discover this God, you know this God, which is supposed to be an intellectual exercise, which takes place at the level of your conscious mind. So once you make this discovery, once you have realized that there is a creator, then you, of your own free will, of your own independent thinking, you decide that you will follow a God-oriented life. You will follow a life which is oriented around higher divine principles. So we see that there is an element of freedom involved in this entire process. You are required to discover God. You are required to know God through your own independent reasoning abilities, through your own faculty of thinking, your faculty of understanding, as you were saying, and then making it a part of your life, quoting you. So we see that freedom is so intrinsic to the most fundamental tenet or the fundamental belief of the Quran, which is belief in God. If I am in an atmosphere where I am forced to follow God, I am compelled to follow God, I won't have the freedom to discover God. I won't have the freedom to use my own independent abilities, my intelligence, my reasoning to discover God, because the belief is being foisted upon me from by an external agency. So that makes my belief very a lesser kind of belief, because you will see that my or your adherence to God or devotion to God would not be so powerful and so convincing until you realize that as the truth that you yourself want to follow, without any constraints, without any compulsion associated with it. And interestingly, we often ignore the fact that if I force someone to believe in Islam, if I coerce someone to believe in Islam or to adopt and comply by Islam or Islamic teachings, then that kind of faith is not appreciated in the Quran. The Quran,
and short-lived.
Yes, and the Quran very interestingly states that simply declaring that you have belief does not mean that you have belief. Belief is something which has entered your heart. You may have heard of this phrase, which is used by scholars. God wants us to have dakhilul qalb iman, or faith which convinces us from within that this is the truth. And such a faith arises or results when it is a product or an outcome of my own intellectual discovery, when it is not something which is simply given to me or forced upon me. So this is why, freedom of religion is intrinsic to the Islamic scheme of things. It is fundamental to the way the Quran envisions human beings' purpose of existence. So if we say that Islam can be forced upon a person, then that is something which jeopardizes God's plan for the individual. God wants to leave people totally free, according to the Quran, so that they can, of their own free will, discover God, of their own free will, impose discipline on themselves. They shouldn't be forced to follow anything. And if they are forced to follow, that is something which is not desirable in the eyes of God. So this is why, as you were also saying, that Islam is about understanding the religion and then making it a part of your life. I think this is the crux of the entire discussion on why freedom of religion.
Marya, let me just add one more thing. Since you talked about the 5 tenets of Islam, Iman is the first tenet. And Iman is very individual. It's about relationship, jo hum bol rahe the. Second tenet is about namaz. Allah Ta'ala, of course, wants us to offer namaz 5 times. That's what Prophet and his ummah is expected to perform. But again, namaz, when you are in sajda, when you जो आपका sajda है, उसमें ज़हन में, you in your head, in your mind, you are offering to someone, and that is again your relationship. That's your freedom. That's your heart. That's your mind. That's your control over it. When during month of Ramzan, when we keep roza, and if we do not have that intention that my roza has to be accepted by Allah, then you will go near, for the world you may be keeping roza, but you know what exactly you're doing, because you may just be going to another room and just having a glass of water. So my point here is that throughout, if you look at the various tenets of Islam, you'll realize that it's so personal, that it's so individualistic, that your relationship is so much about your understanding and making it so integral that until and unless you are convinced about Allah, until and unless you're convinced about the existence of जो आपने बोला, मतलब invisible. If you are not convinced about it, how can you be coerced into practicing it? It's about that sajda. अगर आप sajda कर रही हैं किसी के ख्याल में, that is your head. That's your understanding of Allah.
That's very true. I think this point that you've made, that all the tenets of Islam are centered around developing and strengthening this relationship with God, the Creator. And I think this point is so essential, it's so important, because this means that Islam focuses a lot on a person's spiritual development, a person's inner development and connection with God. And this is inherently a spiritual experience which cannot be forced upon someone. Yes. It arises from within you. It arises from your level of spiritual awakening or enlightenment. It cannot be created from or created in a restricted environment or in a certain environment. It is something which comes from within you naturally. And this is why freedom is so essential to Islam. If there is no freedom, there will be constraints, there will be compulsion, and there will be a kind of an artificial environment wherein you're not really free to explore your Creator. You're not really free to think about your Creator and develop that relationship or evolve that relationship. So thank you for these points. And let's move on to the second question, which you had asked initially about freedom of expression. And that is also equally important, because often we have this notion that Islam does not allow questioning or raising doubts about its beliefs, and we should simply follow whatever we are being told or whatever has been laid down in the Quran. We shouldn't disagree or differ with it. So does Islam prevent a person from raising dissent or voicing dissent from its beliefs? Let's try to
Let's
address
explore
this
this
question.
jointly. I'd ask that question to you. Let me give you my initial thoughts. So, what is dissent? Dissent for me is saying that if a particular belief, particular interpretation of Islam is there, or a particular interpretation of Quran is there at that particular moment in time and history, I should be in a position to say, no, this is not what Prophet meant. No, this is not what was practiced during times of Prophet, because I have read this in Hadith. That is what disagreement for me is. Let me give you a small example here. During the time of Nikah, there are two men who are supposed to be there as gawah, as the witness, right? The practice in the current Muslim households in several parts of India is that those two have to be men. Mm-hmm. Is it mentioned in Quran? Was it how it was practiced during the time of Prophet? No. Mm-hmm. So as someone who understands the religion, isn't it my duty to question that why is it that only men should be made witnesses to a marriage? Mm-hmm. If a woman is capable in her senses, then why can't she stand as a witness now? So that is what my understanding of Quran and Hadith is. That if a particular fatwa is passed by so-called custodians of Islam at a particular moment in time and history, again, I'm saying, then I should be in a position to say that Sharia is about changing time, that Sharia was about debate, that Sharia was about saying that औरतों का हुकूक है, that उनका हक है, और उनके हक के बारे में मुझे भी पता है और मैं उनके बारे में बताऊंगी. That is what my understanding of dissent and disagreement is. That Islam is and should be about discussion. That in a room full of men and women, if there are multiple thoughts and ideas which are going to come about multiple verses, 30 chapters are there. 30 chapters have been interpreted in multiple ways. Quran was written in Arabic. It has been translated into Urdu, translated into English. And when translations happen, we know that they are interpreted. If during the time of translation, if it has been interpreted through the wisdom of that particular scholar, then shouldn't I be also engaging with my Islam through my understanding of my years? I'm talking about lived experience here, Marya, because my lived experience says that if every point of time, if in my meri zindagi ke dauran, if I have at certain particular moments, if I have questioned that why should it be done by only particular set of people, why is it not being done by other set of people? This is my disagreement. But my disagreement is of the practices. It is not what Islam has said. It is about how this has been interpreted and practiced for generations. So when my father was around, when I would raise these concerns, he would address it in a very progressive way. But then again, when you realize the dynamics and how things are, then you realize that particular generations are less tolerant than my father's generation, which was far more tolerant.
A very important point that you've made. I think it's so relevant to the young Muslim community. And the point that you made is extremely enlightening. And I think it's also something which I relate to so much, because you said that if there is a certain practice which is prevalent in the Muslim community, or a certain understanding of Islam, which is becoming a general narrative around you, then you should have the freedom to question it. You should have the freedom to put a question mark on it and ask whether this is truly Islamic, whether it really goes back to the times of the Prophet and whether it has been mentioned in the Quran. And I think that is so essential, because even for me, I would say that there were many questions that I had regarding Islam. I was a person who was not so convinced about Islam, and especially this whole violence and the activities of violence which were attributed to Islam, these were something that really made me question if Islam was a religion of violence. And, when you listen to preachers and fiery speakers, they make you believe that Islam is indeed about killing the infidel and killing people who are opposing Islam or conspiring against Islam, and so on and so forth. So this was indeed a question which brought me into trying to understand Islam deeply. And this was because of the mindset which you had, questioning and asking questions about what is being told to you about religion, questioning the narrative which has become the standard narrative. So coming to this freedom of expression point, you see, the whole question is that we often believe that we Muslims sometimes end up being taught that you shouldn't question, you must just practice whatever you are being told. If you don't, then you may, enter hellfire, and so on and so forth. So we are intimidated in these ways, and therefore we cannot question. And one of the reasons why this has become such a sensitive issue is also because of the whole concern surrounding blasphemy. You see, people think that if somebody says anything which is disrespectful of the Prophet or of Islam, then that person deserves punishment, even capital punishment. So that makes it a very, very essential topic to discuss. And, I used to always think that this is something, the concerns around blasphemy or apostasy, or, saying something which is offensive to regarding the Prophet or provocative, is something that is a modern day phenomena. I used to think that these are occurrences which are happening today, and we Muslims have to deal with them today. But if you go back to the Quran, as you were saying, we should engage with our scripture. If we go back to the Quran, we'll see that a recurrent theme in the Quran is, interestingly, that the prophets and the messengers were continually mocked and ridiculed. And the Quran very explicitly states that whenever a prophet was sent to a people, they ridiculed him. So this derision or scorn that used to be poured at the prophets was something standard that happened with every prophet. No prophet was an exception to it, including the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we have to understand from the Quran that when the Quran discusses this theme of disrespect of the Prophet or contempt of the Prophet, what does the Quran guide us or guide the Prophet with respect to the response that he should give to the people who are speaking in a derisive way to him? So very interestingly, the Quran states that in the context of all this ridicule and disapproval of the Prophet, of religion, the Quran states that, or tells the Prophet, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and kind exhortation, and deal with disputes in the best manner. Yeah. So this is the guidance that the Quran gives. And you see, there are two things that become so apparent from this guidance. The first is, as you were saying, that the Quran does not speak against or try to suppress the culture of expressing freely your thoughts, even if your thoughts differ or disagree with the Prophet or with religion. And second, as you were saying, there is a lot of importance attached to discussion in Islam. So the prophets, when people differed with them or disagreed with them, they did not go about trying to kill those people or trying to curb those people's free expression. Rather, they looked upon their opinions as a different viewpoint, and they tried to express their own viewpoint in response. So they converted these disputes into dialogues or into discussions. They did not seek any kind of ban on people's freedom of expression, even if it was harsh and very critical. And this also reminds me of this very famous anecdote about Galileo, because I have always been thinking why the Quran does not say that if somebody disrespects the Prophet, speaks against religion, shouldn't be killed, shouldn't be dealt with severely. Why? Why is the Quran so lenient on this matter? Why does the Quran allow the culture of free expression, even if it is against the Prophet in severe terms? So when you look back to Galileo, it's a very interesting and relevant example to quote here. He presented the heliocentric theory against the prevalent geocentric theory. And he was at his trial famously forced to recant his claim that the earth moves around the sun. So he accepted that. He said at his trial, yes, the earth does not move around the sun moves around the earth. And it is said that the moment he was set at liberty, he went out, he looked up at the sky, and he said in a very contemplative mood that yet it moves, meaning that the earth still moves around the sun, even though you forced me to go back on my theory, on my words. So what I understood from here is that, when it comes to an idea, an abhorrent idea, an idea which I consider abhorrent, a remark that I consider critical, the way of dealing with that idea or remark is not banning it, or suppressing it from being disseminated, or trying to kill the person from whom it has originated. The way of dealing with the idea is coming up with another idea. If a person has issued a statement or written a book which is critical of your belief, you have to respond by issuing a statement or writing another book. If you demand that that person be killed, that would be a very ineffective kind of a response that you're giving. And this is why, this whole idea that Islam believes in thought crime also becomes important to be important, because you must have heard that there are some people who say that Islam believes in punishing people if they think differently from Islam. But you see, thought crime in itself is something which cannot be accepted by Islam, because Islam does not believe in punishing a different thought, a critical thought, because punishment is meant to deter a crime. And here punishment cannot deter that thought. That thought still lives on, that idea still exists. So the way of dealing with a thought or an idea which is different from yours is, as you said, discussion, engaging with multiple thoughts and ideas, trying to put forward your perspective and somebody else puts forward another perspective. And this is why freedom of expression is something which Islam allows, and it wants to foster a culture of freedom of expression. Because if nobody is questioning religion, if nobody is speaking against religion, there will be no room to, stand up and explain or clarify the tenets of religion. So, we should see, as you said, we should see moments of criticism, moments of difference, moments of disagreement as an opportunity to explain better our point of view with reasoning. Absolutely. Instead of wanting to ban it, or instead of becoming hurt and becoming full of emotions, we should take it as an opportunity to understand the other person and explain our side to that person. So anyway, let's move on to the third issue, and that's an issue which I thought needs to be discussed in the context of the situation that is around us. And it is that often it is thought that, the social structures that are prevalent in a certain society, Islam believes that those social structures should be really something which must be governed by Islam, governed by the Quran or the Quranic teaching. So does Islam allow freedom to a society to be governed by its own principles, or should it follow Islam? Should Islam be imposed or enforced on that society? Should that society follow the structures, follow Islam in structures and in its laws, etc.? This is a theme which I thought needs to be, yes, please.
Yes. So my understanding is that, as we said, the first question that we discussed, Marya, that Islam cannot be coerced. Islam is not about forcing individuals. It's about your own personalized journey and understanding of scriptures, its interpretations, Sharia, Hadith, the lives of Prophet. So if you look at the times of Prophet, while efforts were made to propagate religion, it was about convincing people. It was not about winning lands and then ensuring that particular land that religion that was practiced on that particular land is, is killed or subdued or completely crushed by if that land has been won by the caliphates. So my understanding again is that religion cannot be that that Islam believes in neighborhood, the concept of neighborhood, that your role of a neighbor is more important in your life than even your relatives, because you do not have the choice for neighbor. That is where my understanding of democracy and Islam rests. Because you cannot choose your neighbor, you cannot choose the religion of the neighbor, you cannot choose who all are there in your society. At best, you can ensure that when you are practicing Islam, it should not be even disturbing other people's understanding of their own religion. So when we do, a number of us have started organizing this aftar parties जो हम लोग करते हैं या get together होता है. It is about what? Trying to tell people what Ramzan is all about. That it's about telling others that this is about that Ramzan क्यों होता है, उसका concept क्या है, उसके behind understanding क्या है. For me, if Islam is about giving priority and importance to your neighbor, then neighbors form society. And those societies are about coexistence. And coexistence is an important principle of Islam, that you have to learn to adjust and adapt to changing times. And again, let me go back to Sharia. That Sharia at that time was about, having talaq in a particular way. That triple talaq is not relevant in our times. It's a different society. When first word in Quran is Iqra or Padho, if Prophet believed in that, it was about sending your daughters and men to Chin, that because of the distance, the idea of was that China was very far. If it is about that, then why shouldn't we believe that it is about education? It's about ensuring that all those around you become part of that education journey, about coexistence. Isliye my understanding is that Islam is a very progressive religion that believes that Islam should be part of a society. It should not be looking at dominating a society. It's not at loggerheads with particular existence of a society. I'm just going to begin with that first basic idea of neighborhood. In India, we cannot choose our neighbor in Pakistan or the neighbor in China, right? Similarly, what religion your neighbor practices is not something that you can choose. And that is the beauty of Islam, that you should also be tolerant, that the sound of your religion should not be so loud that it disturbs your neighbor. That respect is so integral in Islam. Respecting every aspect of your relationships. And the emphasis on neighbor is more important than your relatives, because your relatives are not there with you all the time, but your neighbor is.
So true.
Please take this forward.
Yeah, I was just listening to you, very interesting points. And I think you've come up with a very interesting theory, which I've come to know for the first time, related to neighborhood and how you connected it to coexistence. And very rightly, you said that I have never thought of it this way. You said that our neighbors are close to us all the time, and Islam attaches a lot of importance to the rights of neighbors. And this means that you must be tolerant and coexistent with your neighbors. You must not disturb your neighbors. And I also, was thinking based on this that this means that Islam, as you said, does not really believe in non-adjustment. As you said, we must adjust and adapt with people around us. We cannot choose them. Our neighbors are our neighbors. We cannot change them. And therefore, we must adjust and adapt. And I think that's a very important principle, very important point that you pointed out with respect to neighborhood. Because you see, as far as, since we were discussing in the beginning, as far as our personal matters are concerned, as far as my personal sphere and my private domain is concerned, I have the freedom to do what I want to do. But when it comes to society, when it comes to a group of people who are living around me, I cannot have my own way. I cannot have my way of thinking. I cannot force my beliefs on others or my perspective on others. So as far as society is concerned, you very rightly said we have to adjust. And this principle of adjustment has been mentioned in the Quran as mutual consultation. Deciding the affairs of society by consulting, by a consultative process, so that all people, all persons' opinions can be accommodated. You are not just one person who believes that you're right and you are forcing through your opinion. And this is why, it is so important to understand that Islam does not believe in enforcing religion in social affairs. If Islam differentiates between religion as far as the private sphere of the individual is concerned, there the individual can follow the religion or choose to reject the religion. But when it comes to society, if you have a society of believers, and if they want religion to govern their social affairs, then they are free to do so. But if you don't have a society of believers, you have a society wherein people of different beliefs exist or coexist, and they don't want a certain religion to, govern their social affairs, then Islam believes in adjusting to the social will. Islam does not believe in, forcing a set structure or a fixed or rigid political or social institution on people, on society, irrespective of what the people want. So the will of the people is so important. And as you were saying in the beginning, that Islam is in consonance and in conformance with democracy, here, we conclude this discussion by saying that the Islamic principle of social organization is based on democracy, or on a process of mutual consultation between all parties. So let's come to the last part of the discussion, and I would really want to learn a lot from you as far as this topic is concerned, and that is, what is your experience of being a Muslim woman? You were born and brought up as a woman in a Muslim community, Muslim society, and you were very well educated and very successful. Many Muslim women would look up to you and want to emulate you. So what guidance you have for them, what advice you would like to give to them if they want to grow up and want to contribute positively and beneficially to society? And what does Islam say to a Muslim woman?
Let me tell you that it was this inquisitiveness that is so integral to my understanding of Islam and Quran that made me speak to you and made me visit your home one day several years ago when I met you and your sister. So, Marya, I was growing up in a household in Patna. We are three girls. But my father was a very progressive man. So for him, education was about कुरान की भी तिलावत करना है, घर में माहौल अच्छा होना चाहिए, और उसके साथ साथ अपनी जिंदगी को, the way you want to pursue your career, you should. So at every juncture in my career, while I understood that what I was trying to do, my father was giving me references in lives of prophets. So let me just tell you a small example. We often talk about feminism, right? We think that we are feminists. The first feminist was who? Hazrat Khadija, peace be upon her. She was 15 years elder to Prophet. She was a widow when Prophet married. And she was a tajir, a businesswoman, came from a well-to-do Quraysh family. That was Hazrat Khadija. So what all did I learn from her life? That I had the choice of choosing my life partner. Even a widow in Islam can marry. Age difference between a man and a woman should not be about a woman being younger to a man. But all this is from the lives of the first wife of God. Then came the example of Hazrat Aisha. She was someone who participated in wars, did her own part. She was a scholar. And in those times, if women were about intellectual learning, it was about being part of the journeys, being part of the processes, then why should we see women in particular prisons? That's what my upbringing has been about. And again, we often say that what is a marriage in Islam? A marriage is a contract in Islam, in which the permission is sought from a woman. Ijazat hoti hai uski ki aap mera nikah padhaएं. So that's what happened with me when my father came in and he said, "मैं आपका निकाह इरफान से पढ़ाऊंगा." And I said, "Papa, please go ahead." But I'm saying कि हर चीज का एक तरीका होता है, एक तरबियत होती है, एक माहौल होता है. And for me, it's important that when, as a political journalist and as a journalist, when I was covering that entire transition and the legislation against triple talaq, I was referring to Quran. I was referring to certain practices that are there, prevalent in these times, which were done in a particular context. That when we say that men in Islam can have 4 wives, it was in a different context at a different time.
Yes.
Those were times of war. Women needed support of men at that time. So it was done in a particular context. Shouldn't I be, as someone who has understood her religion, be saying these are wrong practices? Yes, that's what I've been doing. And throughout this entire thing, I realized that I may not be offering namaz 5 times a day, लेकिन मैं कोशिश करती हूँ कि 2 वक्त की नमाज पढ़ूं कम से कम, या 3 वक्त की पढ़ लूं. मैं रोजे रखती हूँ because I started keeping roza since I was in class 8th, and Allah has been very kind to me. I genuinely feel, as someone who believes in this, that my relationship with Allah is very, very straight and direct. It includes such that मैंने जो आपको पहले बताया था, that while I'm on a cross trainer, I may be listening to a dua, and that is okay for me, because I don't feel that when you are listening to a dua, you should be fully covered and you should be sitting there and listening to it. Again, my mother and my elder sister, they wear a hijab. क्या उन्होंने मुझे नहीं बोला कि तुमको पहनना चाहिए, उन्होंने बोला है, लेकिन वो दिमाग में आना चाहिए.
Absolutely.
It should come to me at a particular time in life. Shayad you should wear a hijab. For me right now, I feel it's not needed. So I have not done it. But I do believe in one more thing, Marya, that आप जितना देते हैं, ये शायद मतलब जो आप गरीबों को देते हैं, अल्लाह ताला आपको और देते हैं. मुझे उस पर बहुत यकीन है, that ज़कात से ज़्यादा, that if you're able to help others, then Allah is particularly taking care of you. And Allah, alhamdulillah, and I must say it, Allah has been very kind to me. I lost my father in 2012. हमारी अम्मी हमारे साथ हैं, अभी नहीं है, इस घर में नहीं है, but she is, अल्लाह का फज़ल है कि that she is around, and I'm there to take care of her. My sisters are there to take care of her. And we feel very, very blessed that Allah is there and watching over us all the time. And Papa is, and ek cheez let me give you one example, that when Papa died in August of 2012, a lot of people around us would say, okay, you know, Shakil, my father's name was Shakil. So Shakil would be looking over you, tum logon ka sabko dekhenge and everything. And I was somehow not convinced with that theory. So when my Hafiz, who has taught me Quran, he came to my house and he was generally talking to us, and I was generally inquisitive to ask, hey, Hafiz साहब मुझे बताइए कि अब पापा क्या कर रहे होंगे. Said वो अपने हिसाब किताब में बहुत बिजी होंगे, उनको तुम लोगों के लिए वक्त नहीं है. So if you're thinking that if you're getting an award, your father is there and he's celebrating, that is not happening. So, you know, I'm just saying कि कुछ मौके जब आप उनको मिस करती हैं, तो आप दुआ भेज देती हैं कि पापा के लिए, but पापा is not there for us. वो अपनी जिंदगी में एक नई दुनिया में मशगूल है. So वो जो सब लोग बोलता था ना कि that there is someone watching over you, your father must have gone, वो वाली theory मैंने उसी दिन, I was not convinced about it, and I just wanted to be sure कि what is the the real position in that. So वो हम लोगों ने बात करके हाफिज साहब से पूछ करके वो क्लियर कर लिया. So overall you realize that zindagi, you know, Allah has been kind in trying to tell us what is right, what is wrong, and वही एक जरूरी है कि गलत रास्ते पर अगर कोई है तो कोई पुल कर ले कि, you know, this is where you have to stop. And I must tell you that I have been watching your shows, and मैं बहुत ही खास बात कहूंगी कि that between you and Sadia, it's beautiful what you are doing.
Thank you.
It's beautiful the way you are conducting it with so much of nuances. जो शायद, and you know, and I come to know a lot about religion and Islam through your videos, and it's been a pleasure participating in this. Thank you so much.
Yes, and an inspiration to do all of this work that we are doing is really you, people like you, you know, the way you said that you learned about Islam from your father, about Hazrat Khadija, Hazrat Aisha, and how that helped you in developing your understanding of Islam and growing as a Muslim, confident Muslim woman, confident about yourself, that what you're doing is not a deviation from Islam. So I believe it is so important for us to, you know, engage with Islam, to know the kind of models that we have in Islamic history for ourselves. As you were talking about Hazrat Aisha, and I believe that she is a towering example in early Islamic history. You know, a lot of times women get to hear that women are considered of an inferior intelligence in Islam. You must have heard the phrase naqisul aql. They don't have intelligence as much as men do. But you know, this particular figure in Islamic history, Hazrat Aisha Raziyallahu Anha, she is one person who personally for me has been extremely inspiring. Yes. You know, if I read about her and the work that she has done, you know, 50 years after the death of the Prophet, she continually guided the Muslim community about the theology of Islam, about what Islam says, what the Prophet had taught, and what the Prophet brought as guidance for humanity. And interestingly, you know, she was such a highly important figure in the intellectual theology of Islam that you know, it is said that there was a person called Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas, a senior companion of the Prophet, who was a pupil of Hazrat Aisha. You know, he learned Islam from Hazrat Aisha, and the standing of Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas is very high. He enjoys a very high rank today in Islamic intellectual tradition, because if you open any commentary on the Quran, you will see that the commentators almost inevitably refer to the opinion of Ibn Abbas. And if they refer to the opinion of Ibn Abbas, that means that that's a very authoritative and a very reliable opinion. And this person, this very venerated figure in Islamic intellectual tradition, was a pupil of a woman. He learned Islam from a woman. So you see the kind of historical models that we have in the history of Islam. And it's very important for us to look upon these people instead of simply listen to what we get to hear from people regarding women and the kind of notions that are prevalent in the Muslim community regarding women. And it was very nice talking to you. And also, I learned a number of things from you, especially, the point that you emphasized throughout, that ultimately it is your connection to God. It is your relationship with God. This is what you have to strengthen. And this is what guides you all along in everything that you have to do in life. It guides you in your profession. It guides you in your personal relationship. It guides you in all the decisions that you make in life. So it's so important for us to focus on this relationship with God, on, communicating with God, connecting with God, rather than reducing our religion simply to a set of, outward forms and rituals and a culture. It is something which should transform you from within. It should have some intrinsic worth, intrinsic value within you. And that is why it becomes so important. That is why it holds such importance position in your life. So thank you so much for giving time and for sharing your experiences and sharing your understanding and your feedback, your comments and your observations on Islam, on growing up in the Muslim community, and everything that you've learned from people around you, especially your father. Thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you for taking out time.
Thank you so much, Marya. And again, let me say that बहुत ही खूबसूरत तरीके से you have put across a lot of thoughts in the most simple ways, and perhaps we hope that people will be able to benefit, that the understanding of Islam is not at conflict with democracy, that Islam is a very tolerant religion, that it believes in coexistence and adapting yourself. It's not about, fighting it out. It's about also having your own personal equations and relationships. So shukriya so much. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.